right, we are back. Real Monsters. I'm SK Barrett, and we also have with us Mr. Wess
What's up? We are back in the saddle.
and special guest Kelly Evans.
And I'm here in this. I guess I'm in the saddle too. Hi, how you doing?
I didn't know I was supposed to bring a saddle.
That's a big saddle.
uh,
Wow.
yeah.
Well, I'm
Hey.
very small.
uh,
Yeah, I've missed having the show the last few weeks, but it's been, unavoidable, and I probably shouldn't have done the show tonight, but I just could not go another week without doing a show. So here we are, and we are going to talk about one crazy bitch.
yeah.
Let's just get right in
Delphine,
there.
Delphine LaLaurie, or
Madame
how
Delphine LaLaurie.
LaLaurie if you're from the north, and something else if you're from New Orleans.
We're gonna have to rely on.
LaLaurie.
We're gonna have to rely on the person with the New Orleans roots to correct our pronunciation.
Yeah, it always heard a lot about her with the blood, the New Orleans blood that runs in my veins. My great grandmother, having been from Mansura, Louisiana, in Avoyelles Parish, where they have the Cochon de Lait festival, the
Nice.
pig, every year. She was actually raised in the city, and a second or third cousin of mine actually ran for mayor against Ray Nagin before Katrina and lost, needless to say.
Ah,
Wow. So you do have
Yeah.
some
man,
deep roots down
that's a
there.
that was a good election to lose,
Yeah. Yeah,
if
he
ever
was
there was
definitely
one.
like, yeah, I don't want to touch that. But yeah, he has a house in the Garden District down there and everything. Wonder how he's doing.
Oh,
I should
nice.
contact him. Haven't talked to Leo in a while.
Well,
So
there you go. We're
Our,
informative and helpful on this channel.
we're working on
right.
bringing
we're
bringing
working on
family
fixing
together.
on all. We're working on fixing that. All right,
Yep.
Kelly Evans.
Yes.
Why the hell should we care about this Louisiana woman from before the Civil War? What the hell did she ever do to anybody?
Oh, well, let's see. Where
How's that for
does
a setup?
What didn't
where
she
yeah,
do?
where to start? Okay, so let's get it. Okay, so Delphine LaLaurie, she was born in the late 1700s, so 1787, and she married her first husband when she was 13 years old. She came from a very high. She was born in New Orleans, and she came from a very affluential background. So she was used to luxury, used to the rich society of New Orleans. Her parents hosting parties, etc. She married when she was 13, which I sorry, I'm a bit of a medievalist with a sidetrack in serial killers, so I'm not sure the marriage rules in New Orleans back then. 13 seems to me like a little bit on the young side. Um, but she
Well,
married well.
a lot of places with parental permission, there was no age limit.
Oh, okay. So 13 would have been acceptable?
I
Oh, I
mean,
would imagine,
yeah.
especially considering who her first husband was. A
Okay, well,
Spanish military man. Um,
yeah, I was going to say,
with
yeah,
like
he
a 30
was.
syllable name that I can't
Uh,
recall.
okay, hang on one sec. I've got his
Oh,
name
you,
here.
you
I
don't
have
have to
trouble.
you don't have to look it up. I'm just
No,
saying
I've
it's
got it in
way
front of me. So,
long.
spouse number one when she was 13 is Don Ramon de Lopez y Angelo. And he only died, he died 4 years later.
Hmm.
So he died fairly young. But she did travel to Spain with him at one point, so they had a little family. She had one child by him, a daughter, and then her next husband. So she married three times actually. So her next husband, Jean Blanc, which was thank God a
Hmm.
nice easy name to pronounce. She married him when
J-
she was 21.
John White.
John White, yeah, John White. She married him and had four kids by him. I think there was three daughters and a son. And then he passed away. And when she was 38, she married another man, and he was much, much younger than her. So she must have been a looker.
Dr. Nicholas LaLaurie.
Yes, that's where she gets the La Laurie part from. So that's basically just in a nutshell her marital life, her kids. She had ended up having 4, 5, 6 kids in all, and she was a socialite. She was described as being incredibly beautiful, incredibly polite, very gracious to her guests. She basically was the go-to person for anything that was going on in New Orleans. She had connections all over the place. She had some fairly influential relatives. One of her cousins was the mayor of New Orleans at one point. She had an uncle who was another politician. And basically, if you were seen at her soirees, that was it. You were made. So she was some pretty hot stuff. Um, she had a building built while she was married to her second husband, and it had 3 stories, including slave quarters. And she had this built with her own money, so she was rich. She was independently wealthy, as well as marrying rich 3 times.
That is
Um,
the map that we have in here somewhere, SK, of
Yeah.
1140 Royal Street in the
yeah,
French Quarter.
I think it was known as La Maison Blanche, like the White House, like because her last name was Blanc at the time.
Yeah. Yep.
And they ended up moving. So she lived there with her daughters and her last husband, and this is where everything was discovered. So we don't know much about her life prior to living in this house, and her treatment of her slaves. By all accounts, she was actually in public. She was very courteous to her slaves. In fact, the house caught on fire, and that's when everything was discovered. But 2 years before the house caught on fire, she actually freed 2 of her slaves voluntarily. So everybody
One of
around her,
those was from her second husband. His dying wish was to have the what was his name? Oh, I can't
uh,
remember the slave's name, but his dying wish was to have him
yeah,
freed.
there were two. I think there were two
That
older
was the
men that
reason
she
for
said, yeah.
one.
But the
Yeah.
other one we're not sure about. And even if it was a dying wish, she seemed to, like, at least in public, she made an effort to appear completely gracious, completely good to her slaves, all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Sounds like my
In
mom.
in the background, however, there's a whole lot of other stuff going on. So in 1834, the house caught on fire. The people rushed in, tried to get into the house, and the LaLauries said, "No, you can't have the keys to the house. Sorry." Um, the house continued to catch flame, and
Wait,
everybody eventually just
well, hold on. Who couldn't have the keys? The fire department?
no one.
Yeah.
The people in the town came forward to try and help and put the
It
fire
took a
out.
magistrate to
Yeah,
say you're going to let us in. And the reason that the people were clamoring to get the keys is they heard screams from
Right.
inside that house.
yeah.
Well, yeah. Nothing suspicious there. No, no,
Right.
no. It's all
No.
right. We'll let it all burn. But
And
the,
in fact,
but
that
the,
was Dr. LaLaurie's answer whenever people would inquire about the slaves there, is
To
that
mind your
people
own,
should
yeah.
mind their own damn business,
Mind their own
basically.
business. I think there was a quote in the New Orleans Bee, which is the newspaper that had a lot of this information. He said something about, he actually referred to the laws that were interfering with other people's business. Now I want to
Mhm.
get back to those laws, because that's kind of significant to put the treatment into context of what the laws were at the time. Because I've done a little bit of research on those. So basically, um, prior to this, there had been an incident where a young female slave had thrown herself off the balcony, reputedly because she was afraid of being punished for snagging the mistress's hair. She was brushing the hair and she caught a snag. And rather than be whipped, she threw herself off the balcony and died. So there was an investigation, and they were found to be in breach of the laws of the time. And they were forced to give up 9 other slaves. Not freeing the slaves, just give up 9 other slaves,
to
um,
somebody else.
just to somebody else. Yeah. But what they
But
ended
now,
up doing,
wait, do we know that was a suicide? I don't think we do know for
we
certain whether
don't
that was a
know that
suicide.
it was
At any rate,
reported.
she did fall off of
So
the top of
a
the
lot of, yeah,
house.
there's a lot of stuff about, it, just like when I think I was on the Jack the Ripper show, just like Jack the Ripper, there's a whole bunch of stuff to wade through to get to the truth.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
trying to tread a line where I'm sticking as closely to the truth as possible. But when something comes up, I will say, it was reported, or allegedly this was done, or that sort of thing. So
One minor point on the fire is that another reason why the townsfolk would want to put the fire out is they wouldn't want it to spread
yeah, the
to the
buildings were
nearby.
built so close to each
Yeah.
other, and they were wooden.
Right. And
So,
you can't just say it's all right, we'll let it burn because no, that's how you got Chicago burned to the ground.
well,
Oh,
great fire,
sure. Yeah, although
great.
this was at least 50 years before that.
I know,
Well, there's
But
but
also the
yeah,
great, yeah, there was also the Great Fire of London that burned down half of London. So, yeah,
right. Yeah, a fire was a serious problem in those days. Any fire.
yep,
and
yep,
now
absolutely.
after that fire, they
So,
found
hang on.
out that it was caused by, or do
Oh,
we want to
say,
wait on
yeah.
that part of the
Okay, so hang on a
story?
sec. So going back just before the fire, she was ordered to give surrender 9 slaves, but what she did was she actually got some other family members to buy back the slaves, and they ended up in her house again. So that was one little sneaky thing that she pulled. So,
Uh,
um, yeah. So anyway, so the fire. So eventually, the townspeople and the magistrate get inside, and when they go to the top floor, what they find, and I'm sticking to the contemporary report. So the day after the fire, this New Orleans Bee reported. So basically, what they found were about a dozen slaves tied up, shackled in ways that were illegal, broken bones, injuries that were so horrific that they were surprised the slaves were still alive. Um, that's what was reported at the time. Now we'll get into the other stuff afterwards
and
because I know there's a
do
lot
was there a
worse
count?
that's been
Was there a head
reported.
count?
7 is what I
So,
had seen.
yeah, I think it was 7, and then the numbers sort of fluctuate depending on who's reporting and how far it is from the actual thing. But yeah, the New Orleans Bee report is 7. And what they also discovered is that there was a 70-year-old woman, a slave, who was in the kitchen. She was shackled to the oven in the kitchen, and she had actually started the fire because she
Wow.
didn't want to live. She did not want to be a slave anymore. She did not want it. She knew what was going on in the attic. She wanted to end it all, and she actually lived. She actually survived.
Man.
Um,
Did she end up staying in the house?
well, as after the fire was put out, the it was basically ransacked by the townspeople. The LaLauries fled. There's different stories about where they went. So there's one that says they stayed in the States for a little while and then they moved over to Paris. There's one that says they moved immediately to Paris. But we know, or at least we think we know, she died in Paris. So the likelihood is she went sort of immediately to Paris, and never got caught.
Wow. How
But the
long
most one
and
of
how long did she live after the fire?
uh,
Roughly 2, I want to say it was 8 years after.
it depends. Yeah, there's a little bit of confusion because there's actually 2 dates given for her death. So there's an official date that's sort of like the official records in Paris. So that's the 1849 date. But then there's another. Someone found an old plaque that supposedly is like a grave marker for her that says she died a few years after that. So I would go with the coroner or whatever the official record.
Okay, so
So
now
she managed to, yeah. Oh, and hang on, there was one other thing. Oh, one of the most horrific things, actually, in my opinion, was the slaves that were rescued from the house were not, were not shuffled away to another house or treated or put into a hospital or freed. They were actually put on display for the townspeople to come and see the horrific things that the LaLauries had done.
oh,
So,
like a sideshow?
like a sideshow. So, just to add to everything else, they then had to stand there while everybody else came up and prodded and poked them and exclaimed over the injuries. So,
Wow.
yeah. That's basically the LaLaurie story. That's the closest we can get to, I guess, the truth as possible. Um, Now, 2 years later, actually 4 years later, there was a reporter. Her name was something Martineau, Suzanne Martineau, and she started publishing stories about the whole LaLaurie thing. And she had actually been to the town 2 years after the fire and talked to the local residents. And that's when a whole bunch of other stuff started coming out. So you got to take the
Oh,
stuff that Martineau writes with a grain of salt.
because it's at best secondhand.
Exactly. It's from the townspeople. She visited the town to get her information 2 years after the fire, 2 years after the whole thing happened. And by that time, you know what townspeople are like. They want a bit of attention. There's a reporter in town. How can I make myself sound important? So a lot
Well,
of the
plus
stories are going to be
plus
puffed up.
plus all of the gossip in town would be
Yeah,
like, "Oh, did you hear this and did you hear that?" And then it just everything grows out of proportion.
exactly.
But
So
it's
for
also important to sort of stratify the sources there because there was another one that came out about 1946 that spread a lot of misinformation.
is that the George?
Ghost
Uh,
Stories of Old New Orleans, I think is the
yeah, that's
title.
that George. Is the George something? Yeah, I know who you're
And I
talking
would
about.
definitely take Martineau over
Oh,
whatever that
yeah.
1946 film has to
At
say.
least she was closer. It's Harriet Martineau. Sorry, not Suzanne. At least she was closer to the source. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other, I'm still trying to find the name of, I know who it was, 1940s. I'm sure it was George something. I don't remember his name, but I know the book you're talking about.
Hmm.
All right, so so between all the facts, between fact and all the rumors and fictionalized accounts and all the bullshit, what's the best guess on the number of people she killed?
Hmm.
You have that, well, you have the 7 that they got out, and then you also have the ones that they found under the floorboards.
Yeah, let me go into that actually. The history of the property is actually kind of interesting because after the fire, it stood derelict for like years, just years. No one would go near it, and at the time, the property value was it just wasn't as good.
People
So
wouldn't even walk on the same side of the street as the
yeah,
property for
there was
years after that.
there were rumors that the house was haunted and that there were, but so no one touched it basically. So after a while, in the like mid 1800s, they opened up a high school for girls, and then after that, they opened up a music school, a very high class music school in the building, and there were numerous reports of groans and people screaming and ghostly apparitions. One girl woke up and there was like a shackled man standing over her. Um, After that, it closed because no one wanted to stay there. It was that bad.
Wow.
So there was another person who was a recluse in 1899. I think his name was Jules Verney. He moved in, and he lived there for quite a while. And he was kind of like a hoarder recluse, and I think he actually died there. So he stuck it out. And then someone else built it in the early 19, sorry,
Bought it.
bought it in the early 1900s, built up a bunch of apartment buildings. There were so many reports of ghosts that every apartment building was empty. So it was deserted again. And then a bunch of businesses moved in, and they all had problems because either no one would come to the shops or the shops were too haunted. So they all moved out. Nicholas Cage owned it for a little while, and then I think he
Like
had some
wha-
bankrupt.
like
Two,
the actor Nicolas Cage?
Yeah, yeah, I remember.
2007 to 2009, he was
There you
writing a
go.
horror novel that
And
never
apparently,
materialized.
yeah, I guess he had some
The
financial problems.
the
So
ghost took
I
it.
guess there was some bankruptcy problems. So he sold. And at the moment, it's actually a privately owned building. It's apartment buildings, and I don't know about current reports of ghosts. But if you go on one of those tours of New Orleans and they say, "Oh, we're stopping at the," you are literally stopping at it. You are not allowed into the building.
Haha.
Oh, actually, sorry. The reason I brought all this up is
Hmm.
because each successive phase of rebuilding revealed more bones. There were bones in the floor, there were bones in the backyard, there were bones in the side yard. They just found pits where where slaves were buried.
Like multiple bodies per grave kind of concept, mass
Yeah.
grave kind of things.
Yep. In
And
the basement of the building itself, as well as outside the building.
what's the best guess then on
Oh
how many
God.
people?
I haven't seen one. I haven't actually seen anybody attempt it.
I haven't either.
Well, in American Horror, Kathy Bates says 68.
Yep, I watched that this afternoon actually. Yep, the
Yeah.
the the tour guide says, "Oh, she killed 117 women." And she goes, "Oh, don't be silly. I killed 68. I kept them in a book." Yeah,
But the book
sorry, I
probably
love that
burned up.
show.
Yeah, Kathy Bates
Yeah,
is
yeah.
awesome.
Oh, she really is. Well, yeah, we'll get into the sort of like the cult of LaLaurie, and that's one of the reasons. If you've seen
But the
American Horror Story Coven, then you
yes,
know LaLaurie.
season
Well,
3.
and it's when you said cult, they're kind of interesting. There's also stories about when she escaped, she went to the woods around Lake Pontchartrain and
Yeah,
allegedly
yeah,
stayed. This is another story that she allegedly stayed there practicing the occult for some time
yeah. There's.
after.
I don't believe that for a minute. I don't believe a high society woman would live in the woods, would deign to live in the woods. I think she went for comfort. So I reckon she either went to. I think there was a story that she went to Alabama for a while, or she went to directly.
Mobile and then Paris.
Yeah, I think either that happened or she went directly to Paris.
Hmm.
I don't. I can't see her living in the woods.
No, no. I mean, there. It, it was
The most
still. It was
elegant.
still. It was still an age where, class was important, and
Yeah,
when
very
and
important.
in your class there were the do's and the don'ts, and they were hard and fast rules.
Yep, exactly.
And camping was not one of those
No, seriously.
for her class.
E- Even glamping was not allowed back then. I
No,
mean,
no.
yeah. I mean, if you're the toast of the town and you're the hostess with the mostest, and New Orleans high society, there's no way you're going to be caught in a camping tent.
Right. Um,
Um,
so what kinds of things, what do we know that she did to the slaves? I mean, besides kill them. She did more than just kill them. She tortured them,
well,
like
depending on
ongoing
who you,
things, right?
yeah, depending on who you believe, and I've actually got a quote from. Okay, so the day after the fire, the New Orleans Bee said. Okay, so the bystanders broke down the doors to the slave quarters and found, quote, seven slaves more or less horribly mutilated, suspended by the neck with their limbs apparently stretched and torn from one extremity to the other. And there are a couple there who had said they'd been there for some months. Um, Subsequently, there was a judge who entered, and his deposition basically said that he found a negress wearing an iron collar, an old Negro woman who had received a very deep wound on her head, who was too weak to be able to walk. So that's what we know based on the day after. It's still fresh in people's minds.
Mm-hmm.
Now, further going on from that, some of the stuff that, like, for example, Martineau reported, um, there was a couple of people who apparently had their stomachs cut open and the intestines taken out and wrapped around them. There were a lot of them hanged. There were a lot of just cuts and things all over the place. There was one man who apparently was still alive who had a hole in his head and then had a wooden spoon put into his head and apparently to scramble his brains. There were a lot of slaves with broken limbs. Apparently, there was one. She had her limbs broken so that she could fit into the crate that LaLaurie wanted her to fit in. So this is the stuff that came out afterwards.
Hmm.
And with the ones that were inside the crates, that is where you get the myth of the crab woman, for one,
Yes,
where she
exactly,
allegedly broke her bones and reset them at
exactly.
angles to resemble a crab.
Yeah,
And then there
that's
was
another.
another myth as part of that of the caterpillar woman, where
Yeah,
she
that's.
allegedly took all her limbs off and then
Yep.
left these deep circular wounds on her to make her look like a caterpillar.
Yeah,
Wow,
apparently someone
Jesus.
found her in a crate. There's also a story that she had actually stuffed some sort of animal excrement, we don't know what animal, down a slave's throat and sewed up her mouth so she couldn't spit it
Mhm.
out. So, but again, keep in mind this is 4 years after the fire,
Right.
or later. Some of these stories actually might be from the 1940s book.
Yeah, so urban legends have a tendency to grow.
Yeah.
Um,
But having said that, now the source material and especially the growing and everything, even 2 years after when Martinique gathered her evidence, keep in mind that 4,000 people came to see the slaves after they were taken from the house and exhibited. That's a lot
4,000.
of people. Yeah, that's a
Wow.
lot of people to see that kind of stuff and have it embedded in their imagination.
Right. And I bet nobody bothered to ask the slaves.
Oh God, no. God, no. Why would you do that?
Well, no,
Yeah.
you're talking about a time when they were literally viewed as chattel.
Yeah.
Well, okay,
Although
so
New Orleans had relatively slightly more progressive laws than like Alabama or Mississippi at the time.
well,
For
see, yeah,
instance,
I was actually researching this, and they actually had okay, so during the sort of the French rule, like the French rule of New Orleans, or sorry, let's just go over Louisiana. During the sort of the French rule of Louisiana, there was something called the Code Noir, and it was developed in France, and it was specifically for how you treat your slaves, both punishment and sort of like treating them fairly. And it was taken up by Louisiana, and then when the Spanish came in, the Spanish, instead of coming up with their own, they actually adopted most of the rules from the Code Noir into their own. So I'm just trying to find, just to give you an example of what some of the rules were, because they were remarkably enlightened. I mean, I'm not condoning,
It's a relative thing,
slavery.
though.
Yeah. So let me just, oh, here we go. Okay. So for example, so some of the prohibitions, for example, slaves can't carry weapons except under the permission of their masters for hunting. One of the interesting ones is slaves should not sell sugarcane even with the permission of their masters, which is kind of weird.
Yeah.
Masters must give food, quantity, and clothes to their slaves, even to those who are sick and old. Um, a slave who struck his master or wife must be executed. So, sort of things like that. And then there's different things on punishments. But there's also things like, let's see. So if there's children between a female slave and a free man, if the father is unmarried, he's free and unmarried, he has to marry the slave,
Oh,
thus freeing her and her children from slavery.
wow.
Otherwise, if he's married, there would be a fine for both the father and the slave's master if it was a different master, and the fine was 2,000 pounds of sugar.
Oh, that's a lot. That's
Yeah.
huge.
mhm.
Let's see. I'm just trying to think of some of the other stuff. No, they actually had some pretty good, like they actually had very specific rules about, for example, the type of neck irons you could wear, and that's why the neck iron thing keeps coming up with LaLaurie. The type of neck irons she was using, I think, were illegal under the code at the time.
Okay.
So
Mhm.
that's why it's actually commented on. I saw a negress with a neck iron. Otherwise, why comment on it?
Right.
So there were very
Right.
specific rules about how you
In
treated
other
your
states, that
slaves.
would not have warranted comment.
Exactly. Yeah. Louisiana was, like
And
you said, pretty
yeah,
advanced.
and looking at New Orleans itself too, you also had more mixing between the races than other areas.
Yeah, and there
You
were
have the
specific. Yeah, there were very
the
specific
Creole
rules about. Yeah.
communities and
Yeah.
all those others that you don't have anywhere else in the
But
South at the time.
Louisiana was also one of the only states, I think, that actually let slaves buy their freedom.
Yep.
Okay.
Um, so that's another thing I remember.
But
I'm trying to think of some of the.
they would have to have some means of earning money then.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it was a system set against them, but if you
Yeah.
could manage it, then you were permitted to legally, whereas other states wouldn't allow that.
Yeah. So I want to take this for another direction for a minute, if that's all right. And
I
that
expected nothing less.
you're catching on.
Yeah.
um, One of the things that we know about serial killers is they tend to tend to start fairly young. I mean, not necessarily killing young, but the signs start coming out in their early years.
Yep.
And what the common stuff is that they torture animals and various set fires or things of this nature. Um, I'm guessing we don't know enough about her early years to know if that was the case, except she had two dead husbands.
Well, I don't think there was any suspicion cast on her for the death of her husbands. I've
Well,
not
Yeah,
seen.
I am
I've
not
not
aware of any
seen.
either.
I know there wasn't,
Well,
but
okay.
she
So
wasn't suspected of murdering slaves until she was,
just along those lines, let's talk about this way. So most serial killers who are poisoners stick with their MO.
right?
She was not a poisoner.
Nope.
So her husbands would have had to have either suffered some sort of ghastly limb gash, something on their body, and that would have cast suspicion, or she was a poisoner and she changed her MO completely. She had two rich husbands. I mean, why would you change? Why would you change up from one husband to another? It's basically a
More?
sideways move for her.
Okay.
But
That's
anyway,
fair
yeah,
fair explanation. But
it
so
could be.
then
You never
what
know.
set her off then? Was it her
So,
husband?
well, we okay.
There's
So,
one theory with that actually that it involved her uncle having died in that slave rebellion that we touched on.
oh,
And
that's
then in
interesting.
1811, her mother died in a slave rebellion. A separate rebellion.
Mm.
And then that might have set her off
Do
somewhat
we know?
initially.
Do we know how old she was during those rebellions? Because if she was quite young, absolutely. But then she might
Um,
have started younger, and we would have had more signs.
she would have been roughly 24 in 1811.
Okay. So
That
maybe
is,
a little bit.
Delphine would have been.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe not mature enough for those feelings to have surfaced yet. But yeah, I was actually talking about this to someone earlier, just like, why did she do it? Um, we reckon because, okay, so that might have been why, like, that caused the proclivity, why go after slaves. But the other thing is that opportunity.
Yeah.
She didn't have to go out and look for white people or look for people on the streets or stalk her victims. She
Yeah.
had a completely endless supply to do anything she wanted to in the confines of her own home.
Right.
So
Up in their
why would
attic.
you? So if you've already got that inclination, maybe she did, maybe she didn't. We don't know because we don't know about whether serial killers are born with something or not. And I don't even want to get into that. Um, and then the slave rebellions, both her uncle, depending on how close she was, and her mother, absolutely, because she was such a forceful mother. Then, yeah, absolutely. Then all of a sudden, she's a rich woman with tons of slaves and a private
A-
property
And a lot of anger.
and a lot of anger. Yeah, I reckon that's probably it.
What about what about uh Monsieur LaLaurie? What was Do we know anything about his
Uh,
level of knowledge slash I mean he had to have knowledge, but what about did he
well, see, that's
participate?
the
Did he
thing.
aid and abet? Did
Well, see, that's
he
the thing. There's no evidence that any other member of the family had anything to do with it. So it's only her that's demonized. But I reckon there's no way she could have done it without. Okay, so the daughters we know were punished by the mother for trying to free the slaves at times.
Okay.
So we know the daughters were aware that slaves were mistreated just by that. The husband was a doctor, so that's a bit weird.
Right.
Um, he lived in the same house. He can't not have been aware of it. And the fact that he was telling people that, he told the magistrates who came earlier, he quoted that he said something about the law interfering with people's lives, meant that he probably disagreed with the current slave laws. So, yeah, he had to be complicit. Had to be. Absolutely.
Now, there is another conspiracy theory that goes around all that I don't buy a whole lot, that she was doing some sort of scientific experiments on the
No, I
slaves.
don't.
No.
I don't.
I don't
I
buy
don't.
that either.
Okay,
No.
so
If
she
you're
might
doing
have.
if what is it that Adam Savage says? The difference between science and goofing off is writing shit down.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, science is systematic.
Right.
Science is disinterested.
Right.
What she
you
did
know,
is not that at all.
if you try and look at it, I mean, I don't know if this is a dangerous place to go, but I try to do this with some of my writing when I do the horror stuff. If you try to look at it from her point of view, and I'm going to do that, what she was doing is perfectly justified because even from a scientific point of view, she was learning more about the human body than most people at the time.
But she
And the
was keeping
and
that
the
knowledge to herself.
she was keeping it to herself. That's the other. Okay, that's where the argument kind of falls down.
Yeah. Well, but one of
But
the
if she
things.
was satisfying her own scientific curiosity,
Hmm.
on some level she knew it was wrong, obviously, because she kept them on the third story of her home and kept the doors locked and wouldn't let anybody in. But on
Right.
another level, she completely justified it by, going with the scientific theory. She might have completely justified it by just saying, I'm furthering my knowledge, my own knowledge of science here. How cool is this?
To what end? I mean, but
The
because
pursuit of knowledge.
okay. So,
Okay, she was
but
sick in doing it, but
see, Michelangelo furthered his knowledge of anatomy for artistic purposes by, dissecting corpses.
Yeah, at least he got the
And
dead ones, though.
right, and it wasn't always legal what he did,
No, I know. Okay, well,
but
we're just
but still,
we're
but
dissect.
still, he was using dead people,
Yeah.
and he
So
had a
basically,
purpose.
we've just dissected the whole conspiracy that she was doing it for science.
Well, and there's another interesting part of that again, I don't believe at all, but that Nicholas, the doctor, was involved and he was studying ways to use mind control over the
What?
slaves. Yeah, this
Oh
is
my
another part of
God.
that. I think
Where
they
did he
probably
get
get
these
that from the
conspiracy
spoon in the
things?
brain. I mean, there's no
Yeah.
proof of him, but yeah, I
Well,
think that might just be from the spoon.
the spoon in the brain again comes from years after the event, and then it turned into, well, there was more than one guy that had the spoon, his brain scrambled. So it's kind of like you go from the original 7 where this guy wasn't discovered to 4 years later, oh wait a minute, I remember there was a guy with a spoon in his brain, to, oh, there were a bunch of guys who had spoons in their brains. It's
Right.
like, oh, come on.
It's like,
Well, that's why it's a conspiracy theory, Kelly.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
but I want to touch on something about some other known serial killers. One, well, there's Harold Shipman. He was a doctor in England, right, in the 70s.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
killed what, like 200 people, right? I mean,
Mhm.
incredible. Also in England, there were a couple of cases where um, it were a man and a woman couple, and in in at least one of those cases, I think they said,
I know who you're talking about.
yeah, yeah, they said that, she would never have been a killer without if she had never met him.
Yeah, I know. It's a stupid defense.
Well, it's not so much as a defense as much as talking up how, you know, in uh, how your close associates affect you, right? How you can get
Yeah.
drawn into things. I mean, granted, she had this was who was West's the Wests.
Yeah, I was just thinking you're talking about Rosemary West, and I was going to
Yeah,
say it, but I wasn't sure if okay.
yeah, and how if she had met somebody else, I mean, she still had sociopathic tendencies. There's no question about that. But
But what, her crimes
but
would have
with
been less if she had met someone else, or just the
yeah,
opportunity was
Uh,
there with him?
yeah, but because she met up with Fred, and they together developed this MO that
that to me is kind of like the devil made me do it. You
Yeah,
know,
well, but
I
that's
don't.
but it,
that is some weak tea.
Uh,
I'm just reporting what I've heard, but you know what? Who you associate really does have an impact on you.
Yeah,
You
I know.
know,
I was just thinking, actually, the Slenderman case. It
right?
was all
yeah.
down. It was all down to who they were associating with and sort of a group psychosis thing.
Yeah, right. You
Yeah, I
know,
mean, you lie down with dogs, you get fleas,
Okay,
sure,
so
but
let's take this back to Delphine. Oh,
right.
and by the way, just in case Jesse is watching this and he commented on it, and I think it was Wednesday, Delphine is based on the Greek name from the Delphi, where
The
the oracle
Oracle.
was. There was sort of a Greek revival thing going on at the time, so that's why she was named Delphine. That's just for
There you go,
Jesse.
Jesse.
Um, sorry,
And I'm totally speculating here, and I don't expect there's any evidence at all, but maybe like they're like two chemical compounds, Delphine and what was his name? Her husband,
Nicholas.
Nicholas, that separately they're fairly inert, but when you combine them together, kabooey.
so you reckon he's the brains behind the operation?
I don't know. Um, he might have just been totally uh, you know
Complicit.
complicit. He might have been totally dominated by her.
I do
Um,
know that his work kept him out of the house for many hours during the day.
Well, yeah,
And we also know that she was a lot older than him. So she and we also
Yeah.
know that the child she had with him was born out of wedlock.
oh,
So she must have either been fantastically gorgeous to attract a younger man at that time. And I'm not saying that to be sexist. I'm just saying there were probably a lot of young women around at the time, and he probably could have, snagged someone more closer to his age.
right. A
Or
successful
she,
doctor is,
or she had some sort of hold over him.
A younger man with some money too. I mean, he
Exactly.
didn't have nearly as much as her, but he
But
did
still, he was
still.
he was a
See,
catch.
Yeah,
right.
I think the
Well, you
amount actually that I read was she was worth about $66,000 when they married, and he was worth about two
Oh
thousand.
wow. So you see, so there's
but two
something
thousand
weird
dollars was
going.
a substantial
Yeah,
estate in those
Yeah,
yeah,
days.
that's my point. He
Yeah,
brought
but
some there, but he didn't have nearly as much as her.
but
but by the contemporary standards, he was still a catch. And the fact of the matter is,
absolutely.
Right.
he went with an older woman.
Yeah.
He had sex with her outside of marriage. They had a son. They finally got married. There's some, I don't know. It just sounds like there's some sort of weird control she had over him.
But you know what? Speaking from the male perspective, one of the things that meant would have meant to him was he didn't have to ever wonder if she married him for his money.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
And
But
so,
isn't that a strange? That's kind of a strange reason to marry someone.
well, I'm not saying it's a sole factor, but it
Okay.
certainly plays into it's something to consider. It's like, he goes to these social parties and these balls and all these things and all these fluttering fans around the room trying to land this, attractive, successful doctor. And he's got to get tired of, the gold digging going on around him.
Wasn't that one of the main reasons that people would marry back then, though? It wasn't romantic love.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
that notion is modern,
Absolutely.
romantic love in marriage.
It was starting to come into vogue though.
Yeah, yeah, I guess
But
around
still,
that time.
but it took a long time to completely replace it. But still, you gotta go, ugh, they don't care about me. They just see a wallet.
Yeah, I can see that.
And this woman over here,
He went to
she,
such an extreme, though.
how much older was she?
I want to say
Let me.
30 some years.
Yeah,
Whoa. Oh, okay. That's that's okay.
you sound shocked. I
Well, I
can't
mean,
believe you're shocked.
well, I am a little bit, but I know plenty. No, I don't know. I know of several marriages that are 20 years apart that
Actually, you know
were
what?
really super happy.
I would be interested to find out whether he actually lost his mother at a young age, because
Ooh,
that way he would be attracted to an older woman.
yeah.
Or am I wrong?
No,
I,
that would make sense
uh,
from like a Freudian view.
yeah.
I'm not a Freudian, but anyway. Yeah. No, I'm just.
Well, I'm
No,
not
I'm just
either.
thinking. I know. No, but I know. But
I'm not
if
a
he did
Freudian of
lose,
anything.
if he did, oh God, the descent begins. No, I'm just thinking if he did lose his mother at a young age, then he would be looking for some sort of comfort or something to fill the gap that he didn't have when he was a child. If we're getting deep into the psychoanalysis,
I mean, when you're right with something like that.
Yeah.
No matter where it comes from.
and it also would have meant that control that I said she might have had over him, the
Whether
influence she had over him would have been stronger because if she was like a wife and a mother figure to him, he would have done anything for her, like keep her secrets.
the flip, the inverse is, maybe the mother didn't die, but he was like a mama's boy kind of thing.
Yeah, maybe.
And was looking again to replace that mother figure, but she may not have necessarily been dead.
Great. Now instead of writing my book tomorrow, I'm going to be looking up Madame LaLaurie's husbands
By the
and
way, what is the average recovery time from being on the show?
well, I was looking at the last time I was on the show, and it was the beginning of March, so about 6 weeks. And I'm still not quite recovered, but I'm on the curve up. So I still need the wine to,
Well,
do the show.
you were on the curve up.
And I know you're doing a special Mother's Day month next month, so
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'll be invited back.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, after taking over Jesse's show yesterday, I wasn't so sure. Sorry,
We,
back to LaLaurie.
I don't care what
So
you do to
anyway, yeah,
Jesse's show.
Oh God, I was all over the chat board. I'm pretty much take over the chat board on Jesse's show. So anyway, there was
Yeah.
something else I wanted to mention.
Okay.
So LaLaurie, people basically know her better. She does have an Irish background. So I think it's her parents or her grandparents were, no, her father was Irish. So she's actually got a very sort of Celtic background.
Hmm.
But in popular,
Maiden name McCarthy, McClaffrey,
yeah,
something like that.
yeah, they actually had a they sort of they less Irished it. I don't know, whatever the name is. So basically, I was looking at some of the stuff she's been in, and there's tons and tons of stuff. Apparently, she's appeared in all sorts of TV shows and video games, and she showed up as a character in a board game called Evil Baby Orphanage, which I must own at some point.
Oh
So
my
I thought
God.
that was hilarious. Obviously, she's been in American Horror Story.
On the other hand, is there any other kind of orphanage?
You know what that probably comes from, Kelly, is the legend of the devil baby of Bourbon Street, and how
Well,
that
I'm trying to figure out whether it's Evil Babies Orphanage or Evil Babies and the evil is the orphanage for babies. Like, is it Evil Orphanage or Evil Babies?
of that I'm not sure of, but
I
yeah,
have to
that
find
devil baby story is an interesting one in itself. I don't know
Well,
if you
go
guys
on.
have heard that.
No.
No.
Allegedly, it was this baby with very severe birth defects and like horns on its head to where it did look like a devil
Oh,
that was
God.
born to a voodoo priest. It was adopted in the story by Marie Laveau, and it was christened by Madame LaLaurie. It lived to about 5 years and was no more.
Hmm.
But there
Okay.
is interesting. After that, in the communities, the Creole communities and the communities of slaves in New Orleans, there was quite the cult of the devil baby where they would make dolls of it and hang
That
it
is
out in front of their windows to
that's kind of
protect it
awesome.
from the spirit of the devil baby coming in and taking their soul.
Man, I've been to New Orleans. I want to get back down. I've been down there pre Katrina,
Mm-hmm.
and we did the whole. I was actually down there during Mardi Gras. It was a business trip, but I lucked out. And I've been to Marie Laveau's voodoo shop, which was like amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like we were talking about later, just the LaLaurie showing up in American Horror Story. Yes, Marie Laveau is part of the story, and
Mm-hmm.
in the story, Marie Laveau sort of gives LaLaurie something that gives her eternal life, and then she buries her for 200 years, etc., etc. There's no evidence of any of that happening, but
What?
no, there's not. Again, it's the whole thing. Would if you're like one of the richest women in New Orleans, you're not going to go camping. You're not going to go to the black area like of New Orleans to get your hair cut. You're gonna
Yeah.
at the very least you're gonna get someone into your house to do it. So, but yeah, no, I've been there. It was awesome. I love the Marie Laveau shop, and I still have a blessed alligator foot from the shop. So, I'm hoping it'll help me with the writing. No,
It's
actually very.
interesting. All those dolls disappeared for quite some time, and there was a psychic artist down in the city who resurrected them and sort of made them and made new incarnations of them using
Really?
the old ways that they would make them.
The
Oh
He
devil
wow, that's
sold
very
baby.
them
cool.
on eBay, and allegedly the people who were buying them were having horrible phenomena happen. With the dolls getting moved for no explicable reason, and things being ransacked, and all sorts of weird,
Okay,
stuff
so
happening.
Okay, so this is a true story. I when I was down on my business trip, I went into Marie Laveau's voodoo shop. I bought myself like a couple of keychains, like a breast alligator foot and a blessed swamp rat foot. And I also bought a little tin of something that was called Lucky Lottery powder. And I took it home. And I know, okay, I swear to God. And my family at the time, every Saturday night, everybody met at my grandparents' house. We had fish and chips, Scottish family, and everybody bought lottery tickets. So I sprinkled everybody's lottery tickets with this powder. And I swear to God, the next week, my uncle and aunt won $10,000.
Yeah, I
So
Wow.
bet.
after years of playing, nothing, 5 and $10, they won 10 grand. And that was my cousin's braces paid for.
You know, people still take all sorts of, trinkets and offerings to Marie Laveau's grave
Yeah,
down
I
there.
know. I saw that. That's interesting. They're getting a little bit upset by that because it's kind of they're trampling the grave and disrespecting it.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting when during the time of the Devil Baby, when it was still allegedly alive, Marie Laveau supposedly would go around and seeing these dolls hanging in the windows say, no, we don't want that. It brings attention to the real problems of the real Devil Baby.
That's just so bizarre. I'm gonna have to look up Devil Baby. Add that to the list tomorrow.
The Devil Baby of Bourbon Street.
The Devil Baby of Bourbon Street and Marie Laveau's husband. And when did their mothers die? Okay, got it.
So
No, no, not Marie Laveau's husband, LaLaurie's
Oh, sorry,
husband.
LaLaurie's husband.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
yeah, I don't get the concept of hanging an effigy of the thing you're trying to repel. That seems counterintuitive to me.
What? Wait a minute. You mean putting an elf on the shelf doesn't keep the elves away? Damn,
Uh,
I've been doing it wrong all these years.
I just use shotguns. I don't know what
I'm
everybody
just trying
else
to keep the
does.
little buggers out of my house. I put one of those things up. It's creepy as hell. I thought it was supposed to keep them away. Oh, okay. Thanks.
Well, I mean, they don't put giant stuffed crows out in the cornfield.
Oh, this is true. They should
The
try
Devil
that.
Baby dolls were primarily carved out of gourds.
I know,
That is so creepy.
but still, what I'm saying is yeah, you tend to not put the thing you're trying to keep away as the effigy of the
I
effigy
think
that you
that
use. I don't know. Maybe it's a
That's
I,
true
voodoo thing.
because
I
that's
think
true
the
because how
thought
many?
pattern was that it would see itself and be so scared and repelled, kind
No,
of like looking in a mirror.
I understand this
Was
reasoning because all those horror movies where there's a scarecrow and it comes to life and it's really creepy and goes around killing everybody. Obviously, if you put a scarecrow out there, it attracts demon scarecrows. So bad
Right.
idea. Yeah,
Right.
bad idea.
Exactly. Exactly. If you want to keep a demon baby away, maybe put a, I don't know, demon teenager out or something instead.
Okay, so last time I was on the show, we discussed Rasputin and we ended up solving the mystery of the Loch Ness Monster. So now we're talking about Delphine and we're now on to demon babies. Okay, just a little check there.
For those of you keeping score at home,
the Devil Baby was actually a legend that I had never heard until I read up on Delphine again today
I've never
and
heard
looked
that
at
one. That's
some
awesome. I love it.
sources.
I love that. I'm gonna have to look it up.
So,
very
There's a
interesting.
horror story right there waiting to happen. Go, one of you.
Devil baby.
yeah, there's so much interesting history down there in New Orleans.
There really is. I love it. I just I don't know. I'm not.
I think one of my favorites, it's not related to a monster, is Jean Lafitte, the Pirate of the Bayou. It's a cool adventure story I've always liked.
Oh, okay, Jesse. There's a guest for you. Talk about that one.
But
Hey,
No, I like.
I,
I'm not interested in modern history. I'm traditionally a medievalist, but New Orleans really. I just loved it.
hmm
yeah, well, there aren't a lot of, I mean, the farther west you go, the newer everything is. Um,
Yep.
but New Orleans is kind of an oasis of antiquity. I mean, relative to the continent, of course.
It's certainly a character.
Sure.
Of all
Um,
the cities I've been to, it's got quite a character.
yeah, yeah. It was it was a very isolated region for a long, long time.
Still is in quite a few areas down there.
But during the time when Delphine's parents came over, it was a heavy French area. I mean, obviously
Hmm.
because the French had settled in the south more than the north, and then when the Spanish took over, it was still heavily French. So it seemed like a natural choice for a lot of people to migrate to.
I had a question about the ransacking after the fire.
Yep.
Was that just like pillaging, or was it like rioting kind of thing?
The
It
way
was
I
mixed.
understood it, it was a bit of that, but it was also more people being enraged at what they saw.
Yeah, they were. I think it was a, what do you call it, like a uh, mob mentality. So
Lynch
everybody
mob.
was, yeah, yeah, everybody was very, very angry. And then the mentality took over, and even people who possibly weren't even there when the fire was there may have gone in and just trashed the place just because the feeling spread. Yeah, people were pretty disgusted by the whole thing.
Yeah, oh
Given that there
yeah.
were, yeah, given that there were a specific set of rules, and we know they were enforced because, unfortunately for those 9 slaves that she bought back, unfortunately they weren't freed, but the rule did apply there, and she did actually, give up the slaves initially. So we know there were people keeping an eye on these things,
Hmm.
um, and we know they tried at least. I'm not trying to justify any of this, but at least there were people that were trying. So yeah, most of New Orleans was pretty outraged by this.
I think that's a good point to make because I think in my mind and maybe in other people's minds, um, you kind of think of the years of slavery as, like, well, I own these people and I can do whatever the hell I want.
Yeah. But the other thing is, actually, I wanted to point out, one of the rules about owning slaves, from the, what did I with the Code Noir, was actually that slaves must be brought up Roman Catholic, which means that they were actually considered humans. So
Ooh,
they actually, yeah.
Hmm.
So the fact that they were actually considered smart enough to understand the dogma and all the doctrine of Roman Catholicism, and they were being treated like white kids, you are being brought up in this religion, meant that they were considered humans. So at least that was a step up from a few years back.
yeah.
Well, and that's even a step up from other contemporary areas,
Well, from other states,
places
yeah,
like,
yeah,
yeah, like
exactly,
Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is Louisiana specific.
You know,
Right.
and part of my point is, if this had taken place in Georgia, would people have been as upset?
That's a good question, actually. I,
Another thing I
And
touched
I'm
on
not
in reading about
I'm
it.
not picking on Georgia specifically, but as an example
no,
of
but
the
like a
other.
Right.
non-Louisiana state. Well, I've been reading up on all of the sort of the history of sort of like the different regulations that we're going through, and the different, like, the sort of the history of the whole thing. And there was, towards the end, when LaLaurie was doing this, there had been so many revolts. There had been a lot of organizations founded to support the blacks in the South. There'd been a lot of newspapers started that were strictly for the purpose of reporting things that were happening in the South to the black people. So there was
Really?
enormous amount of pressure, not just from the North to the South, but within the South itself, to recognize slaves, to treat them better, and God, to slave them, or sorry, to free them. So I would imagine the people in Georgia at the time would have been under the same amount of pressure and would have been just as offended. At least I hope.
I
I mean,
was reading
you would hope.
something that ties into that rather interestingly, and this gets back to the medical idea.
Hmm.
There
Yeah.
were slaves were commonly sold in Atlanta specifically at the medical schools for
Oh God.
experimentation on them. And this gets back to around the time of Burke's bodies, which
Right.
I'm sure you know the history of.
Yep.
Where it was common that they would go out and get a few of the blacks at the medical schools that they would basically take with them back to the places where the medical students were staying.
Yep.
And they would experiment on them over the weekend and they would do all sorts of things to them. And then they would have to be buried come Monday.
I mean,
Charming.
that's Mangala level shit, man.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
really is.
yeah. So, honestly, I don't think there would have been the same level of outrage in Georgia.
Right. Okay. Well, keep in mind also, I guess Louisiana did have these rules a lot longer. Like they had them in place during the French occupation, so they've had them in place since the late 1700s, early like mid late 1700s. So I
Right.
guess maybe the sensibility, they'd gotten used to the rules, and then they maybe the perceptions were starting to change. I don't know. Yeah, possibly.
It,
I mean,
Yeah.
at one point, I was referring to LaLaurie as, Madame Angela, but that's probably not very nice.
To Mengele.
Well, she was just awful.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I fully expect to be haunted by Delphine this evening, so thanks, guys.
Well, and there was one other sad thing on Google when I was looking at this today. One of the searches was after Madame LaLaurie, feel sorry for her.
Oh no,
what?
what?
I
Why?
think it had to be because of American Horror Story. I didn't dig into any of the results there, but that was something that people were Googling. So,
That it had to be American Horror Story because in the
yeah,
story, I don't know if you've seen Coven. Do you know how it
I
ends for her?
have.
Okay,
Yeah.
so she kind of does a little bit of a turnaround. She kind of shows a little bit of regret, and then she snaps right back into her old character and gets her just desserts. And no, I don't think there's any feeling sorry for this woman, even in a fictional sense.
No, me neither. That's why I was shocked to see that. But
Oh man, that's weird.
So I have another possibility for how she got started on this.
Okay.
So the thing with sociopaths is that um, you know they th well let me just say that I so let's say that she was a society girl who lived a very sheltered life, which was true, very
Yeah.
wealthy, sheltered life. And so imagine then at some point after marrying LaLaurie, she in a rage, grabs a knife and slices at one of the slaves,
Yeah.
and then is maybe shocked at herself, and then goes, "Ooh, I kind of like that."
Well, it's actually funny you
You
should say
know?
that because they actually do offer a little bit of an explanation in American Horror Story, and it has them setting up in the house in New Orleans, and the kitchen staff hasn't arrived yet. So LaLaurie has to cut the head off a chicken
Oh,
for them to eat that night, and the blood spurts from the chicken, and she's fascinated by it. And then a couple of days later, one of the slaves gets a really bad injury, and she's looking at it, and she kind of sticks her finger in the cut in his leg, and he screams, and she's like, okay, yeah, I kind of like this. So that's kind of along the lines of what you were thinking, I think.
oh yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
It very well could be, and I don't think we touched on this part, but her weapon of choice, if you will, was a bullwhip.
Oh really?
Yeah, she was apparently very, very, very evil with that. Yeah.
Um,
That's what she initially chased the slave girl Leah up to the roof with,
Yeah.
and
And
she used that on quite a
yeah,
few.
she was apparently she was so terrified of the whip and the injury that the whip would do her. So this suggests that she's seen other people whipped and the injuries, that she would rather dive off of the balcony than suffer the whip.
And now, since about 1970 in New Orleans, in their wax museum there's actually a scene of her and her slave, what was his name? I can't think of it. It was like her head male slave
Oh,
whipping
okay.
two others in the house. That's in their wax museum.
Oh my God. I when I was down there, I missed the wax museum, and I love those. They're so cheesy. Okay, next time next time I'm down, we're kind of waiting a couple of years to see how things go with regard to traveling to the United States. But yeah, next trip down, I'm definitely got to see that wax museum.
Oh, I should have grabbed a picture of that because there's a bunch of them online.
Oh, I'm gonna go look. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna go look for that. That's
Uh,
hilarious.
I'll look while we're talking here too because it's been. And man,
I
I can't remember the
love
name of that slave.
I do love wax museums.
yeah.
They're
See,
so they're
with
so
the
cheesy
camping
and creepy.
possibility, I
Oh,
was
that's
with the camping possibility with her going to Lake Pontchartrain. If there
Yeah.
was enough pressure on her when she left town, she might have stayed there for a time. If she had no other choice.
But was there like some sort of structure out there? Like, was there a cabin or like, I can't see her just like she wouldn't have had a tent on her when she fled. I can't see her just lying
No,
down
I
in the
mean,
woods and, like,
no, there would have had to have been something there, and there would have had to have been a guide that took her,
yeah,
that way. And that's
I don't
where there
know.
was the theory that it was that same slave who was doing the whipping that
Oh, I
knew that
see.
area and helped her hide out there.
I don't know. I'd say that was the least plausible of all the theories we have.
Seems like the easiest option is just to jump on a boat.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
exactly.
you're gonna have to get out of there if people are, coming for your head.
But remember, they also had a period of time between telling people to go away, they're not giving the keys over, and actually handing over the keys because they were forced to. So
Mm.
they could have gathered up, as much as possible. Plus, they might have had money in different banks. She could have, they could have access to different banks. We also don't know what happened to her husband. Like, I'm assuming he fled with her, and her daughters, because all we know of is like about the death of Marie in Paris, but I don't know when her husband died, whether he stuck around, whether he left with her. I don't know if
Yeah,
Wes, do you know any of this?
he gets kind of overshadowed by her. I don't know his death
Yeah,
date.
and the
Yeah,
daughters as well. I don't know much about them either.
oh crap! It's not letting me put the URL in the chat of this picture.
I'll add it to the list of things I'm going to be spending time on tomorrow.
Yeah, the the kids, holy shit, having
Well,
a
they must
have.
have.
I mean,
They obviously knew, and
yeah,
yeah, I guess the yeah, the
I
stigma.
sent
Like,
it via Skype. You can see the picture.
I can okay, well, I can see the URL, but I'll take a look at it. Yep. Um, yeah, I guess if we have the evidence that LaLaurie was punishing her children for trying to help the slaves, then obviously they were of a different mind than her.
right.
And would you wanted to have flee with your mother, or would you have maybe tried to? They couldn't have made it on their own. I think they were unmarried at the time, which sounds terrible. A single woman making it on her own in New Orleans, but that's the way it
But that's the
was.
reality. I mean, if
Yeah,
they had no personal resources,
yeah, exactly.
um, and they wouldn't have wanted to stay. They would have seen, you know, they would have a pretty good idea how things are going and turning
Yeah,
against the
there's
family. You don't want to stick
yeah,
around for that.
yeah.
Even,
There's no way they could have stayed.
yeah, I mean, again, you get into the class rules, and that would have been, you know, even if they had, you know, girlfriends, families that might have otherwise been willing to take them in under those circumstances, that would have been, unthinkable.
Well, they could have been seen as innocents, especially if, like I said, we know that she didn't want them helping the slaves. But yeah, with that last name, no, I don't think they would have gotten very far. Not
No,
in New Orleans.
no.
Chances are they fled with mom,
And supposedly dad, but
and
who knows?
supposedly, yeah, that's who knows, yeah. Which is very weird because it's like for me as a medievalist, I get used to not having a lot of information because there were no records. But to me, this is fairly modern stuff going on,
Hmm.
and I'm really surprised there's not more records, involving. Well, I don't know. I guess unless she did something horrendous when she was in France, there wouldn't be, would there?
No,
Hmm.
she would have done everything possible to not get attention, right?
Well, see, that brings up the other question about serial killers. Would it be possible for her to just stop?
It's rare, but
Yeah.
you look at was it BTK Wes who had the
Eh,
10 years
He had the
gap?
longest cooling off period. Yeah,
Yeah,
no doubt about it. It was him.
But
and
I can't. But I can't see if she's truly one of the like sort of like the stereotypical. And I know I'm generalizing serial killers that we're looking at. I can't see like she got away scot free. She suffered no punishment. I can't see her not continuing the behavior, but maybe
except
she didn't,
except
just didn't.
her she couldn't play the game by her rules in France.
Well, that's true, actually. And they did have more progressive rules about slavery in France at the time.
Yeah, and they were on the verge of freeing their slaves too, right?
I was just thinking, I think actually it might have been around the time that they were like slaves were illegal, so that could be possible.
And so her entire game would have been, unplayable by her own rules. And
Yeah,
so
that's true.
it, it might have been, challenging for her to not continue, but at the same time, she couldn't
Well,
because
and
because
it depends on how long she was alive when she was over there too.
Yeah.
If it was, I mean, there's an interesting story about how she died. I'm not sure
Is
if
this the
there's
boar?
any. Yeah, the boar hunting accident over there.
tell us about that.
She was allegedly, I guess, mauled by a boar on a hunting trip of some sort, I think is the
Unsubstantiated
story.
story.
Yeah, unsubstantiated, yeah, but a story nonetheless.
Oh, here we go. Okay, so remember I there was remember I was talking about an author called George. It actually in 1888 George Washington Cable actually
Oh, yeah.
he wrote an account of Madame Delphine, and he based it on contemporary reports from the New Orleans Bee, but he also Martineau stuff. But then he also added a bunch of his own stuff and speculation with no attribution.
Hmm.
So I think a lot of the stuff we get, especially the book that came out in the 40s, probably came
Hmm.
from him.
Yeah, that was in, what was the name of the magazine?
The New Orleans Bee.
No, no, no. It was something Citizen that Cable wrote for.
Oh, right. Hang on. I just had it actually.
New Citizen, maybe?
Hang on a minute. All I've got is the New Orleans Bee and the Advertiser. Oh, no, that's all I got.
I'll have to look that up too. Yeah. He wrote that for some magazine from out east, I thought.
Oh, okay. But see, that's, not that much after, but enough that the stories have expanded. And I think a lot of the stuff that people are talking about, the stuff that she did, the horrific stuff that she did. So that's where the number expands from the original 7 to, the 60, whatever, 68 or 63 that Kathy Bates quoted.
Hmm. But it still was a good number.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, I
Yeah.
mean, it
Well,
puts,
considering all the bodies they found, yeah.
yeah, I mean, it definitely puts her in the top echelon of murderers in this country.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I
I mean,
did find the
Bundy
complete
was like a
Washington Cable.
dozen. Bundy was only like a dozen or so, or 20-ish, something like that.
So
And
she
I
beats
say
him, definitely.
only.
Yeah.
So,
No, she
wow.
was pretty prolific. But the the truth is that they wouldn't have considered her a serial killer because at the time she was killing slaves, and sadly, even though the whole religion thing suggests that people thought of them as human beings, a lot of the people didn't. So, are you a serial killer if you're killing people who aren't considered human? I think
Well, they
is
wanted to do something to her, right? Because I mean, they were angry at her at what
oh
she was
yeah,
doing. They wanted to
yeah,
punish. They
absolutely.
they were wanting to punish her in some way.
This
Um,
Okay.
DeepSouthMag.com article puts the number at 54 between 1816 and 1834.
Oh wow. Okay. And then I just did the math, and she lived a further 15 years. If you go with her official birth date in France or wherever. So after the fire, she lived another 15 years.
and died at what age?
I think she was 60, 62, 63, something like that.
Okay. So, hmm.
So anyway, yeah, that's pretty much all we know about her. It doesn't look like anybody kept track of her when she moved. We don't know where she moved to, so it's hard to keep track. There may be newspaper reports out there if someone wants to go into the research that, there was some mysterious disappearances or accidents, or, of she might have had domestic services servants who were black and who weren't slaves she was paying but might have had accidents. I don't know. Someday someone might find something that
Yeah.
will suggest that she continued her activities, but basically that's all we know at this point.
Another factor in why she may have not continued is she may have lost a lot of physical vigor in her flight to
Yeah, that's
France.
true. And she would have been on foreign soil. She would have been in a completely different environment, not her own house. She pretty much had the house built to her specifications. So,
Right.
yeah, so it would have been, well, I don't like to sympathize, but yeah, uncomfortable for her.
Century Magazine is what Cable originally wrote it for.
Okay.
1889.
18, okay. I think
Yeah.
he also wrote a book afterwards based on the research he did for the article called Madame Delphine or Delphine something. Yeah.
I actually put the link for that in the chat. I
Oh,
found a
cool.
free copy of it at that latech.edu.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, thanks.
That was still 50 years after the fact.
Yeah, I know. And
Yeah.
we discussed how things grow and you sort of mutate after the fact. It's just one of those things. I think it's like the Jack the Ripper story. There's so much speculation. There's so many people looking at it. There's so many different angles. There's,
So little documentation.
exactly. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
just one of those things I don't think we'll ever figure out why.
No, and she didn't keep journals or anything, apparently.
No,
Or
but
if they did, they burned up.
It sure is fun to try and figure it out, though.
I can't imagine she was a horribly introspective woman,
Well,
Delphine.
she held all these lavish parties, so she couldn't have been that introspective unless she was just good at hiding it.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of shy people. Well, I don't know. I know a lot of shy people sort of overcompensate for their shyness by being sort of really, really outgoing. But I don't get the sense from her. I think she was very confident.
Yeah.
I think she would
Socially
have.
adept.
Yeah,
I think
definitely.
she would have been the type to say, you know what, my way or the highway, and I don't see any reason for looking
No,
internally.
I don't think so. I also get the impression she might have been a little bit manipulative, sort of based on the relationship she may have had with her last husband.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's not at all hard to imagine. I mean, again, she's 13 when she was first married,
Yep.
and to a rich man.
Yeah.
So she was, from a very young age, used to getting her way.
Yeah. I mean, she married a social equivalent. The what was he, a general or a major?
Is
Um.
some higher up in the Spanish military.
Yeah. But I get the impression he was he was an equal as with regard to economics.
Right. So what I'm saying is that, from the age 13 on, she was used to telling people what to do and expecting them to do it.
Oh yeah, she would have been expected to run the entire household.
Yeah. So,
So with the upbringing she had until that age, and then her expected role, she was brought up with the expected role of being the mistress of the house and running the household, and taking care of all of that. That was her role in society. That was what she was brought up to do. Then yeah, absolutely, she would have felt entitled. She would have felt like her way or the highway. Don't argue with me or else.
but also, as you say, manipulative. The when the men and the women at these social gatherings would go into their respective part wings of the house, it wasn't all just pleasantries discussed.
No, yeah. And I think her first marriage, what did I say? It lasted about 3 or 4 years or something like that. And she was
Yeah.
very young. So I don't think she was up to anything at that age. I think she was still growing into the role of mistress of the house, because how can you not at that age?
Right?
And I think after the first 4 years, after the first husband, she had started establishing herself. And then the second husband came along, and she was married for him for a little bit longer. And I think that's where she really sort of got her feet. She really found her feet, really started doing it. And then by the time she had her third husband, she was a lot older than him. She knew exactly what she was doing. She had a building erected in her own name with her own money. Um, she was in full control at that point.
Yeah. Holy shit! What a woman. Man.
Yes, and she appears in Evil Baby Orphanage, which I swear to God I've got to find that game. I just sorry, I'm hooked on that.
That's an actual thing, huh?
It's just fun to say, Evil Baby Orphanage.
Yeah.
It's like that Monkey Puppy Baby.
Oh God, you got that stuck in my head now.
I love that. Sorry, Evil Baby Orphanage. Evil Baby Orphanage.
Okay.
On that note,
On that note, anything else to add? Anyone?
Not
Anyone?
don't I think that's I'm all lorried out.
Okay. Going once, going twice. Sold. Thank you so much for being on the show again, Kelly.
No problem. I always enjoy
I
it.
hate to cut this short, but I have to pee like a racehorse. So.
All right. No long goodbyes tonight.
Elegant,
See you guys.
All right. Bye.
classy.